This is the Apparelist podcast, designed to bring you real-life conversation about high-level topics relevant to the decorated apparel community.
Hey, Apparelist people. We are so excited you are joining us for another episode of the podcast. We're wherever you listen, whether that's Apple Podcasts, Spotify, directly on apparelist.com, or anywhere else, you can find the Apparelist podcast. This month, I'm excited to introduce you all to a couple of fantastic people I met at the 2025 Printing United Expo. Shane Lunsford is the co-founder and CEO of Grace Apparel Company, a family-run, SBA-certified, veteran-owned business. Not only will Shane share the story of how Grace Apparel came to be, which includes this amazing journey of resilience, but we also have a bonus portion of this that's a little bit sustainability minded and also something that I think is really cool. Joining us is his wife, Erin, who is the founder of a nonprofit called Misfit Misprints. Try saying that 10 times fast. I love it. Which is dedicated to reducing textile waste by recycling and upcycling misprinted and excess garments from the apparel industry and disaster textile donations. So welcome, you guys.
We're excited to be here.
Absolutely. Well, I know we're kind of breaking this into almost like a two-part series. Don't worry, it'll come together as one. But I wanted to kind of start with you, Shane. Let's start with Grace Apparel. Walk me through the evolution of the business. What was the driving force behind starting it?
Well, so Grace Apparel, we've been in business for about 4 years now. We are a contract decorator. And so, what really got us started in that is we were at a point where we needed a change in life. And, I had been in healthcare for about 27 years. My wife is still in healthcare today. And my daughter was a competitive cheerleader. And so we would go to cheer competitions, and every cheer competition, we would buy our $50 t-shirt, which was printed on a $2.23, Gildan 5000, with about 17 cents worth of ink on it. And we said, you know what, we can do that ourselves. And so that's kind of what kicked off the concept of getting into screen printing and, the evolution of what became Grace Apparel.
Why do I feel like most apparel companies get started from like some sort of sporting event where you look at it and you're like, I could do that, but I could do it better.
Right.
Yeah. And then you should pay $65 for a t-shirt and you're like, really?
I know. I mean, I don't want to name any names, but when I went to my son had his first swim meet this year. When I went there, I was like, I should really get a shirt to support his team and stuff. And I got to be honest, I paid for it, and it seems like it might be a really cheap transfer, and I'm not excited.
Most of them are these days. And so, I mean, it's like, and the thing that killed me always about the cheerleading competitions was everybody and their brother has to have the t-shirt or the hoodie or something like that, or both. And there's just lines of people waiting for these shirts to spend, $50, $100, $200, and, for me, I look at it and I'm like, okay, this costs this much and that costs that much. And it's like, oh yeah, that's so not worth it. Yeah. Now my daughter hates it because now we go to things like that or concerts and stuff like that. And it's like, I can make that for.
Yeah.
Yes. It forever ruins you for any other merch experience. All right. Well, so let me ask you this. Is that where the name Grace Apparel came from? Is this named after your daughter?
So our daughter is Grace. And so, she's the namesake. My wife jokes, that you can always tell which one's the favorite.
Not me.
Mind you, we have 4 boys as well.
Whoa.
So.
Okay. All right. Four boys and one. Where does Grace fall in the order? Is she oldest, youngest, middle?
Next to youngest.
Okay. Awesome. I'm sure she still rules the pack, though.
No.
No.
I rule the pack. This is the sucker who Izzy gets what Izzy wants, or should I say Grace gets what Grace wants.
I love it. So, all right. So Shane, when I very first reached out to you, it actually was before the 2025 Printing United Expo.
Yep.
We were doing some company profiles ahead of it to kind of get excited, really figure out why people were attending. And you shared this really defining moment for that profile. It really stands out to me. It's your story of what happened with Hurricane Helene. And So walk me through that because I feel like this is such a defining moment for your business. What happened and how did you guys sort of come through that?
So, for us, so we're in Black Mountain, North Carolina. And, if you guys remember when Hurricane Helene came through, Black Mountain, Swannanoa was the epicenter, essentially. That's where, if you watch Good Morning America or any of the other, big news industry, they were all filming here. So, when the storm hit, this area was completely cut off from the outside world. Basically, all of the roads leading in and out were blocked by trees, mudslides, everything like that. All of our internet, which carried all of our communications, whether it's phone or anything like that, was all severed. And so literally the only way you could get in and out was by helicopter.
Wow.
And if you were lucky enough to have a satellite connection, you could still get satellite service if you had power. On top of that, our like here at the house and things like that, we didn't have electricity for about 3 weeks. We didn't have water until December. And so, those of you guys in the screen printing world, how reliant on water we are. And, so essentially when the storm hit, we had to stop operations completely. And we were closed for a solid 2 months at least. But we, as an organization, my family partnered with my church, and, the morning, of the storm, we went and picked up friends that we had that got trapped other places, brought them back to the house. The next morning we got up and, went to our church and took out the barbecue grill and we started cooking. And, from there, we grew that into working with the town. We took over a defunct restaurant in town and started employing the local restaurant employees that were out of work because all the restaurants were shut down. So helping to keep all of them afloat and keep the restaurants afloat. And, together with the community, put out about 76,000 meals over a couple weeks. The church was able to take in a lot of donations through material, food, monetary that is still being used to help folks today. And but as an organization, that was kind of where we needed to be and what we needed to do at that time. And especially because we weren't doing anything business wise. So,
I could even do my job for at least a month.
Yeah.
And that's driving to people's homes and seeing them because we couldn't go anywhere.
Yeah. Literally. I mean, when we went out to go get our friends the morning that the storm hit, we were literally having to chainsaw through trees and things like that to be able to get to them. So
dogs.
It was a little crazy. So.
Well, yeah. I mean, it's not just that you had to shut down operations at your business; it's that your whole life got upended.
Yeah, I mean, it was kind of a hard reset moment for us, and so but about 4 weeks, like once we got electricity back, and then we started to get some limited cell service. We ended up getting a Starlink, and the Starlink helped us to be able to connect back to the outside world and talk with our customers who were for the most part really understanding. But we were able to start back into some of our like embroidery production and things like that. Screen print, we weren't able to restart screen print services until like January, February of last year.
Okay. Of last year. Wow. So from storm to reopening it was how many months?
Well, so it's kind of phased, so within about a month or so, we were able to start embroidery back. Then so it's basically about 5 months, we were able to start screen printing. And then we had to go to a new location. And so we had to do a build out there. And so technically we weren't back up to 100% until about August of this past year. So it took almost a year to get back up to roughly 100%.
Yeah. Can you kind of talk a little bit about that actually specifically? Because you mentioned have to get it back up in phases. What were kind of like your goals as you went about that? Because it would be a hard thing, I imagine, to wrap your brain around. And how do you kind of approach something that what seems like a monumental task?
Well, and a lot of it was, there were so many external forces that we were dealing with at the same time. And so, because we were dependent on, getting utilities back, and we were dependent on, being able to secure a location. And, we had obviously lost a lot of revenue because we were closed, for a long period of time and not able to perform all of our services. And so, and fortunately, there has been some money brought into the area to help small businesses. Unfortunately, there hasn't been nearly enough money brought into the area to help small businesses. And a lot of the federal funding, our state and those, in it are still fighting today to be able to try and get funding to help small businesses. Because there's a lot of them that either A, haven't been able to recover, or they've been able to recover somewhat. But even now, we're starting to see some of them fail because they took on such debt during that time that the sales just aren't making up for it. And, and so that's kind of the way it was with us too, is, we took on a lot, just even upfitting the smaller facility that we have now, I mean, it was, $100,000 just to upfit that facility, and it's a temporary facility for us.
Okay.
And so, we still have, quite a bit in front of us to be able to get to where we really need to be versus, where we are today. And so, taking that, it was really just in trying to push it as quickly as possible, trying to meet our customers' needs. I would say, for us, it was more customer driven than anything else because, as we were working with the folks, our customers, it was really defining services that they needed us to perform, so that way we could work harder to bring those services back online, versus, just having everything back up and running.
You mentioned you're in a temporary location. So is it just because you need something bigger, or it just isn't outfitted correctly? Is it all the above?
Kind of
What's
all.
your goal for that to get into maybe a more permanent?
Yeah, it's kind of all the above. We're in a temporary situation now. So, and a lot of it is, size. We're in an area where, number one, wasn't a heavy industrial area to begin with here in Western North Carolina.
Sure.
So there's not all the big warehouses and things like that you see in a lot of bigger cities. And then when the storm came through, what we did have, a lot of it sat in lower lying areas and, things like that. And so a lot of it took a lot of damage. And so just now we're starting to see some of those properties come back on the market. But it's still, there's not a whole lot of selection available, and finding something that checks all the boxes, is in the right location, is a tough find. So.
Yeah. And I mean, just because CNN and Washington Post have all stopped talking about this doesn't mean there aren't still residual effects, right?
Yeah. And throughout our region, I mean, you can still drive down the roads and see, a lot of stuff still out there, houses that still need to be rehabbed or destroyed, or,
and I have
like
all kinds of video if you'd like to see, just from this week.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
That is hard to wrap your head around. I think
Consider FEMA the F word around here.
Well, the thing is, I mean, obviously with our current, government situation, there's always funding issues. Fortunately, the state was able to secure, a couple $1 million more in federal funding recently.
Mm-hmm.
But, there's still, well over 100 million, that needs to be, allocated to this area. We're still driving over temporary bridges and other things.
Bridges.
So so I mean, it's going to be years before everything's back to normal.
If it ever gets back to normal.
Yeah. Well, I mean, if you look at like what happened comparably, like with Katrina down in New Orleans, even in that situation, 25 years later, they're still rehabbing from that.
Mm-hmm.
So I mean, I'm hoping 25 years from now, we're not still rehabbing from that storm.
I hope not either, for all of your sakes.
Right. But I mean, we still keep chugging along, and we're doing everything that we can with the resources that we have. And, for us as a family, that means, pumping every dollar that we get back into, the business and to building capacity and, more production capabilities. So.
Yeah, that's actually something I really wanted to talk about, because I feel like whenever something like this happens, it can get really easy to get caught up in like the negative part of it, right? Like, here's what got hit hard, here's where we're struggling, here has been the challenges. But in all of this, you all have managed to get back up, and I'm sure find some small victories. So can you talk a little bit about that as well? What have been the positive moments and situations that have helped build Grace Apparel back up?
So in that, which as this always kills people, we don't do really any advertising. If you've checked out our social media is horrible. And so the positive thing is that people still find us. And as we've gone along and as we've done more work for folks and we've continued to have the business build, we do get the calls from, the bigger, buyers and things like that. And we have been getting more, commercial, as far as like, brand, folks reaching out. And, so we've been able to, a lot of the revenue that we lost, through the storm, we've been able to, start on a road to recovery in that, because we lost some larger clients when we had that happen, just because we couldn't meet their needs any longer because of the storm. But fortunately we've gotten, new clients in to be able to take those places and continue us on the road, that we were on prior to the storm. So,
yeah. And then what would you say kind of, what is your goal for the next 2 years and then 5 years? I mean, what are you really hoping realistically to do?
Well, it's really just, continue stabilizing, from your recovery from the storm. Goal wise is to, continue to build our capacity, for our clients. Because at the end of the day, that's what we are. We look at ourselves as a partner in this versus somebody you just call and, order, screen print from or things like that. We want to make sure that, our clients are well taken care of and that they feel the love per se. And so, I mean, for us, it's building capacity and, and the hope is in, 2 years, that we'll be back to 100% back to where we were, and, have all of our projects that we had at that time back online. And so, I mean, and then just growing capacity because, right now we consider ourselves a full service provider. We provide screen printing, embroidery, direct to film printing, direct to garment printing, dye sublimation, roll to roll dye sublimation, cut sew. We do rhinestones. So a little bit of everything. So, as far as the apparel side goes, and then, we're taking on some partnerships recently where, we started to start doing some more promo products and things like that. So we're expanding into some hard goods. And then obviously trying to grow the nonprofit side to make sure we're doing everything sustainably. So,
yeah. And actually that's the perfect segue into sort of part two. Yes. So this was also something that when I met you guys at the expo and I met you, Erin, I got a little bit of insight into. Let's talk a little bit about Misfit Misprints. When did that launch and why?
Achieve color consistency, efficiency, and precision with G7 Plus certification, the industry's gold standard for color management. Whether you're in packaging, commercial print, or digital production, G7 Plus ensures neutral gray balance and visual consistency across all applications, helping you reduce waste and improve quality. And getting certified has never been easier. Choose from live in-person training for hands-on experience, live online training for real-time learning from anywhere, or on-demand training for flexible, self-paced education. No matter your schedule, there's a G7 Plus certification option for you. Printing United Alliance members save 20% on all courses and certifications. Stay ahead of the curve, view training options, and get certified at printing.org/G7 Plus.
I'm not the best at talking, so he may have to come up with this. So during this whole hurricane process, one thing, we jumped in, started doing the recovery, as he mentioned, not only with the cooking, but distributing all this stuff that, I mean, people all over the country just randomly sent stuff. So some of the stuff that we got sent was a lot of used clothing.
Yeah.
Some of which is wonderful, but some of it was like, Pat Paul died 30 years ago. We found his hunting stuff. We didn't check the pockets or wash it. So here's his stuff, which, again, not complaining, but we were overwhelmed. So essentially a natural disaster turned into another natural disaster for our hub, because just the influx of non-usable, hard to redistribute type stuff was left in all elements of the weather and stuff. So we decided, what can we do to help not only get people what they need, but how to prevent stuff from being wasted. So that's kind of how Misfit Misprints came to light. And then on top of that, a lot of people do need quality clothing, but in the disaster relief section, it's more if people want new stuff. So with the Misfit Misprints, we realize there's a lot of textile waste involved with, if you press it and it's off that little bit, that what do you do with it? You can't give it to your customer. So most people either toss it or rag it, and it ends up going to be thrown away. So we're trying to repurpose that for people who need it, and it prevents more waste being put into the world. I mean, landfills is, of course, one of the big ones, but just being able to help the community in a positive way. Who cares if it's misprinted or has a little error to it? It's still going to clothe you, keep you warm, keep you dry, and all of that.
Yeah, this is something I'm very personally passionate about. I think it's something like 9 million, might even be billion tons of textile waste in this world. There's textile deserts in Chile that you can see from space. I mean, that to me is unacceptable, right? Like, what?
Oh, look, we have this. Let's send it to this other country who needs it, but they have so much of it. We're just going to make another disaster.
I was just thinking, and that's what I really liked about what you're doing here with Misfit Misprints, is because not only are you taking action against something like this, but you're also kind of helping try and reset that mind, that thought process. Because while most of these people are good intentioned, right, in sending apparel and clothing to a disaster area, they don't always think it through,
right,
or really put a lot of intention into it. So I love that mindset shift you guys are trying to propel here.
Well, and as we got, towards the end of like some of the disaster relief and people were still sending things, it got to the point where a lot of the resource hubs were at capacity of what they could take. And so what was happening is people would come down and be like, well, we're not taking this stuff back.
And they just leave it.
And they would just drop it into a parking lot. And so we literally had parking lots full of used clothing that was getting, obviously destroyed by the weather.
Yep.
So that really drove us to, okay, well, we gotta solve this problem.
Yeah.
And so that started, the nonprofit side, and, us being in the apparel industry already, we know that misprints and manufacturer defects and things like that are huge. And that's not even talking about, the waste that's created just in the manufacturing process through all the trimmings and everything like that. And so from a goal standpoint, it really is to be that partner in being able to take all of that in. If it's misprinted stuff, if it's stuff from a show that got left over that was printed, or if we also work with like companies and corporations that, if they're doing a rebrand. So right now, US Cellular was bought out by T-Mobile. So we're taking all the US Cellular goods in that are now misbranded. So that way they can purchase new that are for T-Mobile. And so, it allows us to do one of a couple things with them. We can either redistribute them back into disaster relief or homeless relief, helping out other nonprofits. We can take and overprint them. If it's something that can't be released back out into the wild the way it is, we can overprint it or embroider over it. Or we can take and break it down to either become fiber fill, or we're trying to start working with a partner to be able to break it back down into fiber to be able to respun it back into shirts and stuff.
Yeah. I've heard of a few companies kind of around, like mostly a couple in the US that are doing something similar. And I think that's brilliant. I think some of them are turning it into like furniture or insulation, things like that. So it's again changing that mindset of what can we do with this rather than just toss it on the ground
for
in the
sure.
landfill. So you're still pretty early in the evolution of this business. How are things going so far? I mean, do you guys feel like you're really kind of starting to get a little momentum? Where would you say you are progress wise?
I mean, there is some momentum. I have, or should I say, we have a social media sites for Misfit Misprints, which I kind of run. So it's not super professional. It's fun. But through that, we've gotten some response from other printers and stuff, one of which is local. Then, Rock had donated a big Gaylord box last year full of all kinds of their show stuff and misprinted stuff. So that has really helped a lot. The biggest thing right now, of course, is looking for funding to be able to get like a larger facility to be able to kind of get really going in reprocessing, redistributing, because right now, I mean, I travel for work. So a lot of it is me taking all of these things that I package and stuff in the hotel and distributing it through like the blessing boxes, stuff like that. But our goal is to have partners where we can do on-site disaster relief or on-site pop-up shop kind of things where we can kind of get the community more involved with it as well. And we have a church locally here that we have done a lot of refilling for their clothing closets and stuff with some of that used clothing and misprinted stuff. Mm-hmm. So the goal is to be more of a national type situation versus just a grassroots little local thing. We want to kind of expand it.
Yeah, I mean, those things take time. They do, right? It takes a while. And that was actually one of the things I was curious about, is because, like you said, with disaster relief, you end up with like piles of clothing in parking lots. Yes. I do know just beyond that, a lot of thrift stores are overwhelmed with they're starting to turn away clothing donations and things like that. It sounds like you guys have put a lot of thought into how to navigate that. You're not just another conduit to toss. You're finding real ways to repurpose and upcycle, reuse, whatever these garments.
And I mean, we've redistributed to help Western North Carolina, the university down in Silva. We are able to send us some of the nice used clothing over there to help with students and stuff. So they were able to have jackets and all that kind of stuff too.
Well, in long term, we really are looking at the systems that need to be in place with an organization like this to be able to scale it over time and be able to continue to do it in a responsible way, mm-hmm. to where we don't become part of the problem. So it's one of those situations where we're in that phase of getting up off the ground with it. It's been going for a little bit over a year now. We're still bringing in new partners. We're
always looking.
Yeah, we're trying to finalize our partnership with like the Give Back Box, where people can send us donations, whether it be a printer or whether it be an individual or things like that, and be able to take care of the postage, get it back to us. And so, it's just really continuing to define that roadmap so that way we're capable long-term of being able to, someone like Eames Brands, has a shipping container of, thirds that they need to find a home for that's not in a landfill. They have an option for that. So
I keep hearing sustainability being defined as this journey. We're not going to solve all the problems overnight. But if we can pick one realistic piece to change in small ways, we are going to slowly right this ship.
Yep. Yeah. But I mean, there's folks, I mean, stuff happens in the printing industry all the time. And,
Yeah.
where it's like, I can't tell you how many times I have to tell customers, always plan because machines eat stuff, or things like that happen. We try to have a zero spoilage, but stuff does happen every so often. And so just like every other print shop that happens and, they need something to do with it and you can only have so many regs. So,
Yeah.
um, and I mean, some of the stuff, when you look at things, people have, issues with hoodies or they have issues with, jackets or things like that you really can't just cut apart and make into rags. But you really need a thing. And for a lot of these companies, it's something that can't be released into the wild per se in their local market, because it would affect their customer. And so we're very conscious of that and try to either distribute it. If it can be released the way it is, we try and distribute it in an area that's not local to that company, to where the likelihood of it getting back to, like we have a client in Maryland that we do that with. And so we obviously distribute things down here so it doesn't get back to Maryland.
Right.
Or we can overprint it or things like that, or destroy it. Kind of whatever the donor's choice is.
Sure.
So.
Makes sense. Well, as we sort of come to the end of this episode, you mentioned always looking for partners, looking for people to work with. So can you share some contact information or ways to get in touch with you for anyone listening who might be interested in reaching out?
Yeah, so on the Misfit Misprint side, you can definitely reach out to us through social media or through the website. Our website has our phone numbers, email addresses, all that stuff in there. But, like Erin had said, active on social media, happy to chat anytime with anyone. Same thing on the Grace Apparel side. If anybody needs anything, we're always excited to chat. We actually end up with a lot of people reaching out to us through Facebook or other social media platforms, even though we don't post a whole lot on it.
Yeah.
But we get a lot of folks that reach out that way. And same thing, website lists all of our services from the Grace Apparel side. And, we are very competitive, as far as anything that we do. So.
I love that. And of course, we'll share all of those links and emails and social media accounts and things like that in the show notes. And of course, as I mentioned early in this episode, we did interview you guys for a profile. So I'll make sure I link that as well so people can kind of read a little bit more about you. Shane and Erin, thank you so much for being on the show today. It's been an absolute pleasure. And I have this feeling we are going to cross paths many more times in the future.
That's good.
Yeah, thanks for having us. We definitely appreciate it. So, and always happy to make new friends.
Yeah.
Always.
Right. And to anybody listening, don't forget, apparelist.com is where you can find all of this great information, content, and more. You can find our podcasts, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, anywhere you listen to podcasts. Thanks so much for another great episode.
Thanks.